Hi everyone, Miss Miller here with this week's self-care video. For this week's video, we're going to be talking about something a little different. We're going to be talking about how to respond to racism as a white person. I have a lot that we're going to get into today, but first I just want to locate myself within this conversation and acknowledge that I am a white person, grown up in a pretty white world, raised by two white parents. So part of me says, who am I to talk about this? But one of my friends put it well and said, who are you not to talk about this? Because it needs to be talked about. So that's why I'm here and talking to you about this. I have been actively anti-racist since about 2014 when Michael Brown was killed by a police officer who was then called innocent. And that was when I woke up. And if this is the moment that you are waking up, I want to be the first to tell you welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're a part of this work. Please stay engaged. It's hard work, but I'm glad you're here. And obviously if you're watching this video, it's because you care. So let's get into it. The first thing you can let go of is the idea of what can I do? White people are very insistent on wanting to do something, wanting to take actions, and I honor that, and that is good. But first, what we need to do is step back and do a lot of individual work on ourselves. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. A lot of our work is internal self-work. It's not glamorous. You're not going to get accolades from people of color. You're not going to be on the news for it, but it's the work that needs to be done. Second, realize that racism is not about individual acts of cruelty, but it's about systems and ideas and messages that further white supremacy. So I want to be clear here. Racism is not your grandma that says the N-word or bad apple cops. The racism that we're talking about here is systemic racism, big racism, capital R racism. Fighting systemic racism is more than just not being racist. It's about being actively anti-racist. So with that in mind, here are some things that you can do. First, educate yourself on the U.S.'s racist history from conception to modern day. Learn about this history using documentaries, YouTube videos, books, articles, and I will link a few starting places down below, but it's your job after that to continue doing more research. Second, educate yourself on your own family's personal history. Learn where you've come from. It's privilege that we often, as white people, don't really know what culture we are or if we have a culture. So it's really important that you learn about your personal history. Ask your parents, ask your family where you're from. Learn those things because that informs who you are. And third, educate yourself on ways to help. This video is a great start, but this video should not be the only one you watch on what you can do in response to Black Lives Matter. The next thing you can do if you want to fight anti-racism is acknowledge your privilege. And if this is hard for you, first off, I feel you. I understand it's very hard. But second off, if this is hard for you, you need to listen better. Because you do have privilege as a white person. And I know, as growing up poor, it was really hard for me to accept that I had privilege. I looked at my experience of not having parents in the home and, having our light off all the time and said, privilege, what is that? But it took work for me to realize that as a white person, I do have privilege. There are many kinds of privilege. There's economic privilege, gender privilege, age, ability, all these things, and privilege just is. We need to make it not such a loaded word. Privilege does not mean that you are racist. Privilege simply means that you are privileged, and you have that privilege. So you can't accept the racist history of the United States of America and not see the way that white people have benefited from that. So that continues into the modern day, and we still continue to benefit from racism. So, acknowledging privilege could look like this. Here's an example. I can walk by a stranger without them fearing me. I can browse a store without being watched. My teachers, when I was being a butthead, saw untapped potential in me instead of a problem. I didn't earn these things, and that's the thing about privilege, is that it's not earned, and that people of color deserve these same privileges, really. But we live in a world where those privileges are given to white people. The third thing you can do to be actively anti-racist is to challenge your implicit bias. So what is implicit bias? Implicit means without question, and bias means a preference over one group or person or thing over another. So implicit bias is basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. So implicit bias is similar to privilege in terms of it's not your fault that you have implicit bias. Implicit bias is something that we all have. We all make judgments on people when we see them. So below I will link a test for you to take to test your implicit bias. And just remember that it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you have bias. Learning about that bias and then moving forward is one of the best steps that you can take. So you aren't responsible for that, but you are responsible to change it. One major way that you can change your implicit bias is to look at the media that you consume. Do you only watch shows with white people in them? Do you only listen to music by white people? Do you only read books by white people? And if so, diversify that a little bit. Learn from voices that are different from yours. I promise you it will benefit you in more ways than one. The next thing you can do to be actively anti-racist is to influence your circle. So first you need to identify who is my circle of influence. Who listens to me when I talk? Maybe it's your friends or your family or your acquaintances. And then ask yourself, how can you help them be more anti-racist? Where are they starting from, and what's a step that you can show them in the right direction? Maybe it's as simple as, hey, that thing you said was, I thought, a little bit offensive. Or maybe it's, hey, I read this really good book. I'd be curious what you thought of it. It can be a small step, but it is our responsibility as white people to make sure that other white people are getting on this wagon too of social justice and learning, not only learning about, but taking ownership for making our society more equitable. Educate people on the history that you learn. History is one point in this conversation where people can often come together. Like, slavery did happen. Jim Crow did happen. So the more you know about that history and can speak to it, the more you can educate your circle. Disarm people. Relate to them. Disarm them by relating to them. You can say things like, I used to think similarly to you. Or, it used to be hard for me to understand this as well. Or, God, I can see why you feel that way. Here's how I see it. If you go at the conversation aggressively and only tell someone and don't listen to them, their mind is not going to change. And rage is a part of this process. Rage is a part of the process of fighting racism. And as white people, we have to make sure that our rage is not leading us. The goal here is to be effective. And to be effective, you have to kind of suck up your emotions and then work on your people. This is our duty as white people. The next thing you can do to be actively anti-racist is to speak up to racist actions when you see them. So under this, we'll talk about two things. We'll talk about explicit racism and implicit racism. So explicit is something that is right there, obviously racist. So maybe, for an example, you're on the bus and a student is telling another student that she has to take off her hijab, right? That is kind of an attack on her character, right? An attack on her religion. So if that happens, there are some do's and don'ts. Do, confront the harasser directly if you feel comfortable. Don't wild out and yell at them, because that could cause more danger on the person that they were harassing in the first place. Do go sit by the affected person or stand between the harasser and the affected person. Don't speak for the person being harassed, because they have a voice and they don't need you to speak for them. You can ask them, may I intervene? Or is it okay if I say something to that guy? But don't speak up for them, because that's not your place either. And again, be non-aggressive but direct. Use I language. I'm hearing you say she needs to take off her hijab, and I won't stand for that. This is what it means to put skin in the game. And this is what people of color need us to do. White people need to be the people standing up when this happens in public. But we also need to stand up to implicit racism. Racism that's more subtle, more secretive, more quiet. This will be most often what you do. And for me, being an anti-racist white person, this is the thing that I do most of the time. And that's calling out racism when you see it and it's small. So it can be as simple as saying, that's not cool, man. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Asking questions is a good starting point. You can say, why, when you speak of this black woman in power, do you remove her title? Or, why did you call on Tyrell to speak to slavery when it's my people who did it in the first place? Or, I noticed you said this. Do you think that might be the whole picture? And listen to the answers when they respond to you and respond to them. This is ongoing work. One conversation probably is not going to change someone, but it's ongoing small conversations where you're asking questions, being non-aggressive but direct. And you can do this with your parents, with your friends, with your teachers. One thing here is I want you to watch out for your pride. Speak in a way that engages the other person. This is about accountability, not about condemnation. Because as white people, we've all been problematic. We've all messed up. And we need to keep that in mind when we're talking to other white people about race. The next thing you can do to be actively anti-racist is check in on your affected friends. Right now in our country, what we're talking about is police brutality and just interactions with the police and racism in general. Are there any people in your life, are there any close friends who are affected that you haven't said anything to? And this can be awkward. It can be awkward to be like, hey, you're black, are you okay? And that's why you only do this with your friends. You don't go to an acquaintance or someone you barely know and bring up Black Lives Matter to them because they don't know you. But when it's your friend, you can say, hey, I've noticed this in the news. These are some of the things I'm feeling and I wanted to check in on you. And if they don't want to talk about it, if they're your friend, they'll say, I don't want to talk about it. And then you have to accept that. But it's important that you're checking in. They will remember if you checked in on them. And that's an important thing to do. And lastly, the last thing you can do if you want to be actively anti-racist is to take direct action. The best thing I can tell you here is to connect to a local coalition or organization that's doing the work, and they can keep you updated on what direct actions are needed in the present day. So one great organization is called CARW, Coalition of Anti-Racist Whites. I will link their information below, as well as a few other organizations that I think might be good. Another direct action you can take is to donate money to causes you agree with. You might not have much money, but the money that you do have, where do you spend it? Could you spend some of it charitably, giving to organizations that you care about? Third, you can sign petitions that you agree with. Change.org has a lot of petitions, or they go around on social media, but do add your name to those petitions. It matters about numbers. How many people have signed those petitions make people pay attention. You can call, email, or write to your local leaders. Young people, this would be my favorite thing for you to do, is to Google the name of your city and your mayor. Kent Mayor. Who is it? And then you'll find his information or her information, and you can contact them. Or school superintendent, maybe. Maybe you have an issue at school. Maybe you see racism within your own school and you want to go to the top about it. That would be the superintendent. You can always email or write or call these people, and your voice as a young person is so important, and I would love to help you come up with what it is that you want to say or help you feel prepared to have those conversations. But more than anything, have those conversations and do those things. Send the emails. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to say, I'm concerned about this and this is unacceptable. And the more people say that, the more change that we'll see in our policies and practices. The last thing you can do that's a direct action is you can boycott stores that invest into harmful practices. So this takes some research, but you can see it's all online who owns what business and where they donate their money to. So the more you learn about that, the more you can decide what stores you want to support with your money. And the last thing I'll say for you guys is just to be aware of the white savior mentality. To be aware of making it about you and your own individual wokeness. This isn't about us. It's really not. It's not about how good of a job we're doing or how great of an ally we are. We're talking about righting centuries of wrongs at the hands of our own people, and we need to keep that in mind. You will not get, nor do you deserve, applause from Black people just for fighting for them. being actively anti-racist is the least we can do, considering our history. Everything you know now is because you were taught by someone else, so stay humble. Same with me. Everything I know in this video is because I've been taught by amazing leaders of color and white leaders who have helped me in this work. And I'll leave you with one last thing. This is what I think is the most important thing about anti-racist work as a white person. And that is to say, I will mess up and I'm accountable for my mistakes. Because we're going to mess up. We're going to say the wrong thing. We need to realize that's going to come. And at the same time, we are accountable for that. So we don't just say, oh, sorry, when we mess up. We learn from it. We grow from it. We take accountability. We apologize, right? We make it right. So thank you. I know this video was a long one, but it's really important stuff. And I'm glad you were here listening. Let's keep this conversation going.